The poor girl had no idea that the 3 abandoned babies she found would connect her to the country's youngest billionaire, who had been desperately searching for them. Before we dive into the story, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe a child can make a difference in the world, leave your like now. Enjoy the story. The morning rain beat against the cracked sidewalk as 7-year-old Sarah Mitchell clutched her basket of wilted daisies against her chest. Her worn-out sneakers splashed through puddles as she walked down Maple Street, the same route she had walked every day for the past 2 years, since Mrs. Henderson from the children's home had stopped looking for her. "Flowers, beautiful flowers for your love," Sarah called out, her small voice barely audible over the noise of morning traffic. But today felt different. The usual businessmen rushing to catch their trains seemed more distracted, whispering urgently into their phones and holding newspapers with bold headlines she couldn't read. Sarah's stomach growled loudly, reminding her that yesterday's old donut was the last thing she had eaten. She needed to sell at least 3 bouquets today to buy something more substantial than the crackers she had been rationing all week. As she turned the corner toward the park, where she usually had better luck with families, something caught her attention. There, partially hidden behind the large tree near the fountain, was an elegant wicker basket covered with a cream-colored blanket that looked too expensive to be abandoned. Curiosity overcame her usual caution. Sarah approached slowly, her heart pounding hard with each step. The basket was larger than anything she had ever seen, ornamentally woven with intricate patterns that reminded her of the elegant shops downtown where she was never welcome. But then she heard it, a soft whimper, then another and another. With trembling hands, Sarah carefully lifted the corner of the blanket. What she saw made her gasp and nearly drop her flower basket. 3 little faces looked at her, identical baby boys with the most beautiful blue eyes she had ever seen. They couldn't be more than a few months old, dressed in clothes that probably cost more than she could earn in a year. "My God," she whispered, kneeling beside the basket. "Where is your mama?" The babies looked healthy but hungry, and one was starting to cry louder. Sarah looked around frantically, hoping to see desperate parents searching nearby, but the park was empty, except for an elderly jogger in the distance who hadn't noticed anything unusual. A piece of paper was tucked under one of the blankets. Sarah carefully pulled it out, but her limited reading skills could only understand a few words: safe, love, and something that looked like never. 20 minutes passed, then 30. No one came. The crying grew louder, and Sarah's heart broke thinking about these beautiful babies being left alone. She thought about her own memories of abandonment, the cold nights, the endless hunger, the fear that no one would ever care. "I won't let that happen to you," she whispered fiercely, surprising herself with the determination in her voice. "If you're already supporting Sarah, leave a like to give her strength on this incredible journey." Making a decision that would change everything, Sarah carefully lifted the heavy basket. Her thin arms strained under the weight, but love gave her a strength she didn't know she had. As she struggled toward the abandoned warehouse she called home, Sarah had no idea that just 12 blocks away, 30-year-old James Carter was offering a reward of $10 million for any information about his missing sons. Behind her, hidden in the park's shadows, someone watched her every move and smiled coldly. The hunt had just begun. The abandoned warehouse that Sarah called home had never felt so small. 3 babies changed everything. She carefully placed the elegant wicker basket in the warmest corner, using her own worn blankets to create walls against the cold draft coming through the broken windows. The morning light, filtering through the cracked glass, cast dancing shadows on their perfect little faces. "All right, little guys," she whispered, studying each baby carefully. "I'm going to call you Matthew, Daniel, and Christopher. Those are strong names for strong boys like you." Matthew seemed to be the natural leader, always the first to cry when he was hungry, the first to smile when he was content. His bright blue eyes followed Sarah's every movement with an intelligence that seemed to go far beyond his few months of life. Daniel was quieter, more observant, content to watch the world around him with those same impressive blue eyes, but with a gentleness that reminded Sarah of peaceful mornings. Christopher had the strongest grip and held Sarah's finger so tight that she wondered if he somehow understood that she was all they had in this frightening world. But strong names didn't solve the immediate problems. The babies were hungry, crying in harmony that echoed off the warehouse walls. Sarah had exactly $4.37 to her name, money she had earned selling wilted daisies to hurried strangers, and baby formula cost more than she had ever spent on anything in her short life. She ventured to the convenience store 3 blocks away, her heart racing with each step. Leaving the babies alone, even for 10 minutes, felt like abandonment. The thought made her stomach twist with guilt and fear. What if someone heard them crying? What if they got cold? What if they needed her? The convenience store seemed impossibly bright after the warehouse's darkness. Mrs. Chen, the elderly Korean store owner, looked suspicious when Sarah approached the counter with 3 bottles and a small container of formula, the cheapest available. "Are these for your mama, honey?" Mrs. Chen asked gently, her rough hands pausing as she scanned the items. Her voice carried genuine concern, the kind Sarah rarely heard from adults. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah lied, her cheeks burning with shame. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she had learned that adults asked fewer questions when they thought someone else was responsible. Adults liked simple explanations that didn't require them to get involved in complicated situations. Back at the warehouse, feeding time became an elaborate dance of survival. Sarah warmed the bottles using hot water from the building's only working faucet, a rusty fixture that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. Then she sat cross-legged on the cold concrete floor, trying to feed 3 hungry babies with only 2 hands and an overwhelming amount of love. She propped one bottle carefully while holding another, alternating between the babies as they squirmed and moved. Matthew grabbed the bottle impatiently while Daniel patiently waited his turn, and Christopher watched her face intensely as if memorizing every expression. "There you go, my sweet boy," she murmured to each one. "Drink plenty. You need to grow big and strong." When night fell over the warehouse, Sarah wrapped all 3 babies in her own winter jacket, the only warm thing she owned. She placed them close to her body to give them warmth, and hummed the only lullaby she remembered from her early childhood. She didn't know who had originally sung it to her, maybe her mother, before whatever happened that put her in the system. But the melody felt like love itself, like safety in an unsafe world. "We're going to be okay," she promised them in the darkness, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how, but we're going to be okay. I won't let anything bad happen to you. I promise." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance and car horns played in the city's endless symphony. But inside their makeshift home, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful moment was borrowed time, that somewhere out there, someone was looking for these beautiful children, and that their little family's time together might be ending faster than she could imagine. James Carter stood in his penthouse office on the 42nd floor, staring out at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that usually made him feel powerful and in control. Today, the view mocked him. Somewhere in that labyrinth of buildings, his sons were missing, and all his wealth and influence seemed completely useless. 48 hours. His sons had been missing for exactly 48 hours, and every minute felt like a lifetime of torture. He hadn't slept, had barely eaten, and had consumed enough coffee to supply a small army. His usually impeccable appearance was disheveled, his $5,000 suit wrinkled, his perfectly combed hair falling over his forehead, his face shadowed with several days' stubble. "Mr. Carter, the FBI wants to update you on the investigation," his assistant Amanda said quietly from the doorway. She had been with him for 6 years and had never seen him so broken. "Agent Morrison is waiting in conference room A." James didn't turn around. He couldn't bear to see the pity in anyone's eyes. Not Amanda's, not the FBI agents, not the dozens of security specialists who had been working 24 hours a day. "Tell me they have something. Anything, a lead, a sighting, a damn candy wrapper that can point us in the right direction. Amanda's silence was answer enough. The kidnappers haven't made contact. No ransom demands, no threats. It's unusual, Mr. Carter. That was the word that haunted James's every waking moment. Unusual, when someone took the sons of one of America's richest men, a man who controlled shipping companies, real estate empires, and technology firms across 3 states. They typically wanted money, mountains of it. The silence was more terrifying than any ransom demand could have been. James thought about Elizabeth, his ex-wife, now lying unconscious in the intensive care unit at St. Mary's Hospital. The doctors had induced a medical coma after the accident that was supposed to kill his entire family. Elizabeth was driving the children to their music lesson when the truck forced them off the road. The same people who had orchestrated this carefully planned accident to look like a tragic incident had somehow taken his children from the wreckage. The official report said the children's bodies were never found in the river. The unofficial truth, which James had paid dearly to discover, was that someone had pulled them from the car before it sank. Someone with a plan. Mr. Carter. Amanda's voice interrupted his dark thoughts. Connect me with Detective Wilson and call all the TV stations in the city. NBC, ABC, CBS, all the local channels. I want to make an announcement. An hour later, James stood before a wall of cameras in the lobby of Carter Corporation headquarters. The prepared speech his PR team had written lay forgotten on the mahogany podium as he faced the media circus and spoke directly from his broken heart. Someone out there has my sons, he began, his voice hoarse with emotion. 3 boys, identical triplets, only 4 months old. They are innocent, they are perfect, and they need to come home. He paused, gathering strength from somewhere within. They have the most beautiful blue eyes you've ever seen, and they laugh when you sing to them. Matthew has a strawberry birthmark on his left ankle. Daniel is always the first to fall asleep during bedtime stories. And Christopher, his voice broke slightly. Christopher has the strongest grip of any baby I've ever known. When he holds your finger, it's like he's clinging to life itself. The cameras captured every emotion as James continued, his usual businessman composure completely abandoned. I'm offering a reward of $10 million for information leading to their safe return. No questions asked. I don't care who took them or why. I just want my sons to come home where they belong. If you're excited about this story, comment below what you would do in James's place. Your opinion matters to us. Behind the cameras, in the crowd of reporters and onlookers, someone smiled coldly and quietly moved away from the chaos. The game was becoming much more interesting with each hour, and the stakes had just become significantly higher. 3 days of caring for 3 babies alone was destroying Sarah's small body. Her body constantly ached from lifting babies, warming bottles, and sleeping in strange positions on the warehouse's hard floor. Her flower sales had dropped to absolutely zero. She couldn't leave the babies long enough to work at her usual corners where businessmen might buy wilted daisies out of pity or guilt. But something beautiful was also happening. Something that made all the exhaustion worth it. If this story is touching your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe in the power of love. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any inspiring story. Christopher had started reaching for her face when she fed him, his little fingers exploring her cheeks with gentle curiosity. Daniel made soft, cooing sounds that almost sounded like mama, which made Sarah's heart feel like it could explode with joy. And Matthew watched her with those incredible blue eyes, as if he understood every word she spoke, every promise she made, every fear she tried to hide. "Good morning, my beautiful boys," she whispered during her dawn feeding ritual, sitting cross-legged on the cold floor with bottles arranged around her like a fortress. "Today, we need to be extra smart. Our food money is almost gone." Her $4.37 had dwindled to 83 cents. The formula would last maybe 2 more days if she diluted it slightly, something that made her feel guilty but seemed necessary for survival. Sarah had survived hunger before. had spent days eating nothing but discarded pizza crusts and the occasional apple thrown away by picky children. But seeing the babies cry from empty stomachs was unbearable in a way that made her chest tighten with panic. That's when she remembered Mrs. Parker. Mrs. Parker lived in the brick building directly across from the warehouse and had always been kind to Sarah. She was elderly, lived alone with 3 fat cats, and often sat on her fire escape feeding stray animals with patience and kindness. She had given Sarah hot chocolate once during a particularly brutal winter storm, without asking questions about why a small girl was wandering the streets alone. Sarah spent an hour cleaning the babies and herself as best she could with cold water and paper towels she had found in the warehouse bathroom. She combed her tangled hair with her fingers and wiped the babies' faces until they looked presentable. Her heart pounded like a drum as she carefully carried them across the busy street, praying that Mrs. Parker would be home and willing to help. "Sarah, my goodness, child, I was wondering where you disappeared these last few days." Mrs. Parker's eyes opened dramatically when she saw the babies nestled in Sarah's arms. "Holy Mother, where did these little angels come from?" "Please don't call anyone," Sarah said quickly, the words coming in a stream of desperation. "They're my responsibility now. I found them abandoned and scared, and I couldn't just leave them. But I need help. I don't know what I'm doing." Something in Sarah's voice, perhaps the fierce protectiveness mixed with genuine terror, must have convinced Mrs. Parker, because instead of asking difficult questions or reaching for the phone, she simply opened her door wider and invited them in. "Come in, dear. Let's feed these little guys properly and figure out what's what." Mrs. Parker's apartment was warm and smelled of cookies and lavender air freshener. She moved with surprising efficiency for someone in her 70s, warming bottles to the perfect temperature and arranging the babies in makeshift beds using soft sofa cushions and clean dish towels. Her 3 cats, Mr. Whiskers, Princess, and Fat Tony, observed the proceedings with typical feline curiosity but kept their distance. "Now then," she said gently, "once all 3 babies were content and fed, I suppose you tell me exactly how a 7-year-old girl ends up with 3 identical babies who clearly come from a wealthy family." Sarah told everything, finding them in the park in that expensive basket. The mysterious note she still couldn't fully read, the way no one had come looking for them in the obvious places. Mrs. Parker listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions that helped Sarah remember details she had forgotten in her panic. "Child, these babies are no ordinary finds," Mrs. Parker said finally, studying their fine clothes and the obvious quality of everything they were left with. "Someone very wealthy is missing these children. Someone with enough money to search everywhere. Does that mean I have to give them back?" Sarah asked, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. The thought of losing Matthew, Daniel, and Christopher felt like having her heart torn out. Mrs. Parker was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face with wise eyes that had seen decades of life's complications. "It means, sweet child, that we need to be very, very careful about what we do next." The announcement of the $10 million reward changed everything overnight. Within hours of the press conference, James Carter's phone lines were flooded with hundreds of tips from across the country. Most were false leads, desperate people hoping for easy money, claiming to have seen triplets in impossible locations like Los Angeles and Miami. But Detective Wilson insisted they investigate every call, no matter how unlikely. "Mr. Carter, we need to discuss security measures immediately," Wilson said during their emergency morning meeting in James's office. "If someone really has your sons, this reward makes them extremely valuable. That could work to our advantage, or it could make the situation very dangerous very quickly." James barely listened to the detective's security concerns. He was studying the photographs his private investigator had compiled overnight, every possible location where someone could hide 3 babies in the metropolitan area. Abandoned buildings, homeless camps, rundown motels, even suburban houses where neighbors might not ask questions about crying babies. The city suddenly seemed impossibly vast. What about the woman who reported seeing an unusual basket in Central Park that morning? James asked suddenly, his finger stopping on a police report. The jogger, Mrs. Maria Thompson, 62 years old, retired teacher. She runs the same route every morning at 6 o'clock. She said she saw a young girl carrying something heavy from the fountain's direction, but didn't think much of it at the time. The description was vague, small, thin, probably homeless, carrying what looked like a basket or large bag. A girl. James felt something cold and sharp settle in his stomach. Someone gave my sons to a street girl. It's just one lead among hundreds, Mr. Carter. It could be nothing. It could be someone's imagination running wild for the reward money. But James's business instincts, the same instincts that had built his empire, told him otherwise. This felt different, real. He thought about his own childhood, before his father's technology patents made them wealthy. The nights he spent hungry. The way adults looked through homeless children as if they were invisible, as if they didn't matter. I want surveillance teams at every known homeless camp in the city. Check abandoned buildings, the places where street children hide. And Wilson, James's voice hardened with determination. If someone is using a girl to hide my sons, they've made this personal in a way they can't possibly understand. Meanwhile, across town, a black sedan with tinted windows parked outside Mrs. Chen's convenience store. The occupants had been following reports of unusual baby formula purchases, large quantities bought by someone who didn't fit the typical customer profile. Mrs. Chen had mentioned the young girl who had been buying formula for several days, always paying with small bills and coins, always nervous, always in a hurry. The description matched other reports from the area. A small, thin girl seen carrying heavy objects, moving through the neighborhood as if trying to remain invisible. The passenger in the sedan made a call to a number not listed in any directory. "We may have found them," a voice said, cold and professional. The girl matches several witness descriptions. She's been buying formula and baby supplies. Send the recovery team to do a grid search of this area, and the girl has served her purpose. Handle that discreetly. The line went silent, and across town, James Carter continued his desperate search, unaware that the same people who had taken his children were now tightening the noose around the brave little girl who had become their unexpected protector. Mrs. Parker had been a godsend, but even her kindness and experience couldn't solve their growing problems. The babies were thriving under proper care, gaining weight, sleeping better, developing distinct personalities that made Sarah love them even more. But she knew they couldn't hide forever in the elderly lady's small apartment. 3 identical babies were memorable, and people in the neighborhood were starting to notice unusual activity. "They're getting stronger every day, Mrs. Parker observed, watching Matthew try to roll over on the soft carpet while his brothers watched with interest. And more noticeable, 3 identical babies with those remarkable blue eyes. People remember that. They talk about it. Sarah nodded, anxiety growing in her chest like a physical weight. She had noticed more strangers in the neighborhood lately. People who didn't belong, who walked too slowly, who asked too many casual questions about homeless children and unusual sightings. Men in suits who claimed to be social workers but didn't carry the right identification. Women who said they were from child services but asked strange questions about baby formula purchases. "Mrs. Parker, what if their real family are bad people? What if that's why someone left them in the park?" Sarah had been wrestling with this question for days. What if returning them meant putting them in danger? The older woman was quiet for a moment, her rough hands gently stroking Daniel as he dozed peacefully on her lap. "Sometimes, child, families are complicated. People make mistakes or circumstances force impossible decisions. But these babies, look at their clothes, their health before you found them, the expensive basket they were left in. Someone loved them very much and wanted them to be found by someone who cared." That afternoon, while Mrs. Parker dozed in her recliner and the babies slept peacefully in their makeshift nursery, Sarah decided to venture out for supplies. They needed more formula, more diapers, and Mrs. Parker was running out of the special baby soap she had insisted on buying. Sarah had gotten 3 blocks from the convenience store when she noticed the man following her. He was trying to be subtle, staying half a block behind, pretending to look at shop windows while keeping her in sight. But Sarah had developed sharp instincts for danger during her time on the streets. When she suddenly turned into an alley between 2 buildings, he quickened his pace. When she doubled back to the main street, he was speaking urgently into a phone, his eyes never leaving her small figure. Panic flooded her system like ice water. Without thinking clearly, she ran. The man chased her through the maze of downtown streets. But Sarah knew every shortcut, every hiding place, every fire escape and basement entrance that could provide sanctuary. She dove into a subway entrance, wove through crowds of afternoon commuters, and finally lost him in the chaos of the shopping district, where hundreds of people moved in different directions. When she arrived back at Mrs. Parker's building 40 minutes later, breathless and terrified, she saw something that made her blood freeze in her veins. A black sedan was parked directly outside. Through Mrs. Parker's 3rd-floor window, she could see silhouettes, tall figures that definitely weren't the elderly lady. Strangers were in their safe haven near her babies, and she couldn't reach them. Sarah's hands trembled violently as she realized the terrible truth. Someone knew about the babies. They had been found, and they were dangerously close. From the shadows across the street, hidden behind a dumpster in the alley, she watched and waited, her heart breaking as she heard one of her children crying inside the apartment where she couldn't reach them. Matthew's cry. She knew it was Matthew because he always cried loudest when he was scared or hungry. Do you think Sarah will manage to save the babies? Leave your answer in the comments and activate the bell to find out what happens next. Sarah crouched behind the dumpster for what felt like hours, watching the black sedan and listening to her babies cry inside Mrs. Parker's apartment. Every instinct screamed that she should run up there and protect them, but she knew falling into that trap wouldn't help anyone. The sound of Matthew's terrified screams cut her heart like broken glass, and she had to bite her own hand to keep from screaming back. The autumn night was getting colder, and Sarah's thin jacket provided little protection against the wind cutting through the alley. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She hadn't eaten anything since yesterday's shared sandwich with Mrs. Parker, but the physical discomfort meant nothing compared to the agony of hearing her children in danger. When darkness fell completely, she saw them carry Mrs. Parker out on a stretcher. The elderly lady seemed unconscious but breathing, her grey hair disheveled and a visible bandage on her forehead. Sarah's heart squeezed with guilt. Mrs. Parker was hurt because she tried to help them, because she showed kindness to a homeless girl and 3 mysterious babies. Then came the moment that changed everything. Through the apartment window, illuminated by harsh fluorescent light, she saw a tall man in a dark suit holding Matthew roughly by his small body. Even from across the street, she could hear her little boy's terrified screams, could see how the man was treating Matthew like cargo instead of a precious, fragile child who needed gentleness and love. The man's movements were impatient, professional, devoid of any recognition that he was handling a human being. When Matthew continued crying, the man shook him slightly, muttering something Sarah couldn't hear, but whose tone was unmistakably threatening. That's when Sarah noticed something the kidnappers had missed in their hurry. Mrs. Parker's fire escape was on the back of the building, hidden from their view by the old brick structure's architecture. The elderly lady had shown it to Sarah days ago, mentioning that was how she escaped a kitchen fire years back, when her husband was still alive and they were younger. Sarah waited until she saw 2 of the men drive away in a separate car, presumably taking Mrs. Parker somewhere, hopefully to a hospital where she could get help. Though Sarah feared they had darker intentions, that left at least 2 still in the apartment with her babies. Those weren't great odds for a 7-year-old girl, but better than facing a full team of armed professionals. She slipped through the alley behind the building, using skills she had developed during 2 years of avoiding detection by police, social workers, and the occasional predator who saw homeless children as easy targets. The fire escape was old and rusty, but structurally solid. Sarah climbed up with practiced silence, her bare feet finding purchase on the metal grating, despite the cold that left her toes numb. Mrs. Parker's bedroom window was unlocked. The elderly lady had mentioned she never worried about burglars from the third floor, saying anyone athletic enough to climb that high probably needed whatever they could steal more than she did. Inside, Sarah could hear voices from the living room, cold and pragmatic. The boss wants them moved tonight. Carter's reward is bringing too much attention from police and media. What about the girl? She's seen our faces, knows about the operation. Orders are to eliminate all witnesses. She served her purpose keeping them alive, but now she's a liability. Sarah's blood turned to ice water in her veins. They weren't just taking the babies. They were planning to kill her. But why? If this was about ransom money from wealthy parents, why murder a homeless girl no one would miss? What could she possibly know that made her dangerous to them? She crawled toward the living room, staying low behind Mrs. Parker's furniture. A worn sofa covered with crochet doilies, a coffee table stacked with library books about gardening and cooking. Through the doorway, she could see Christopher and Daniel in their wicker basket, both crying frantically, their faces red with distress and confusion. Matthew was being held by a man with cold eyes and expensive shoes that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. The man's grip was too tight, too careless, treating her precious boy like an object instead of a child. "Shut them up," the man growled impatiently. "Sedatives should work faster on babies this size." Sedatives! They were drugging her babies, poisoning the innocent children she had fought so hard to protect and nurture. Sarah had never felt rage like this before. It burned through her small body like liquid fire, making her forget fear, forget the impossible odds, forget everything except protecting the children she loved more than her own life. These men had hurt Mrs. Parker, terrorized her babies, and now planned to drug them and kill her. Mrs. Parker kept a heavy ceramic vase on her bedroom dresser, a wedding gift from her late husband, painted with roses and filled with dried flowers from her window garden. Sarah grabbed it with both hands, surprised by its weight, but determined to use whatever weapon she could find. "Sir, we should move them now. Too many people in this building heard the crying earlier. Someone might call the police." "Fine. Load them in the van and keep looking for that street rat. She can't have gone far on foot." The man holding Matthew turned his back to pass the baby to his companion, finally giving Sarah the opening she had been waiting for. She struck with every ounce of strength in her small body. The vase shattered against the man's skull with a sound like thunder, sending him crashing into Mrs. Parker's coffee table. Books and teacups flew, and Matthew fell from his arms, but Sarah was already moving, catching her little boy before he could hit the floor. The second man turned, reaching for something in his jacket, probably a weapon, but Sarah was already running. She snatched the basket containing Christopher and Daniel with her free arm and rushed toward the bedroom window, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it over everything else. "The girl, she's here. The target is in the building." Gunshots exploded behind her as Sarah dove through the window onto the fire escape. Glass shattered around her, and a bullet whizzed past her head close enough that she felt the air displacement. But she kept moving, holding the three babies as she ran down the metal steps with desperate speed. She hit the alley running, her thin legs carrying her and the babies toward the maze of downtown streets where she knew every hiding place, every shortcut, every escape route that could save their lives. Behind her, she heard car doors slamming and engines revving urgently. "If your heart is racing as fast as ours, leave a like so Sarah has strength in this desperate escape." Detective Wilson burst into James's office at 2 in the morning, his face grim with exhaustion and the weight of new revelations that would change everything. He had been working the case for 72 hours straight, surviving on coffee and determination, following leads that seemed like dead ends until tonight. "We found something," Wilson announced without preamble. Mrs. Parker's apartment. There was a struggle. Blood splattered on the walls, broken furniture, and neighbors reporting gunshots around midnight. James was instantly alert, his fatigue forgotten as adrenaline flooded his system. He had been sitting in his office chair for hours, staring at photographs of his missing children, praying for any news that could bring them home. My children, were they there? We found bottles, baby clothes, toys that matched the descriptions from when they disappeared. Someone has been taking proper care of them, feeding them, keeping them clean, treating them with love. Wilson put down an evidence bag containing a piece of paper that made James's breath stop. And we found this. It was the note from the original wicker basket, but now James could see something that made his heart race with new possibilities. In the corner, barely visible under enhanced laboratory lighting, was a partial fingerprint that wasn't there when the babies were taken from the accident site. This fingerprint belongs to a 7-year-old girl named Sarah Mitchell, Wilson continued. Officially, she doesn't exist in any government system. No family records, no address, no school enrollment. She's been living on the streets for at least 2 years, completely invisible to social services. But James, Wilson paused, his voice taking an unusual tone. The neighbors described her very differently than we expected. What do you mean? James asked, though something in his chest was already beginning to hope. She wasn't working with the kidnappers. According to Mrs. Parker, the elderly lady who was helping her, this little girl found the babies abandoned in Central Park and has been caring for them as if they were her own family. She fought armed men tonight to save them, used a ceramic vase as a weapon against professionals with guns. James felt the world shifting around him, his understanding of the entire situation reshaping. You're telling me a homeless girl has been raising my children, protecting them, not just raising, repeatedly risking her life for them. The blood in the apartment belongs to one of the kidnappers. This little girl, weighing maybe 60 pounds, fought trained criminals with nothing more than courage and love for children she never knew before a week ago. James stood abruptly, walking to his floor-to-ceiling windows, where the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. Somewhere out there, a 7-year-old girl was running through dangerous streets with his children, hunted by killers, and it was his fault. His $10 million reward had painted a target on her back, made her a liability that needed to be eliminated. Mr. Carter, there's more, Wilson said, his voice heavy with implications. We tracked the kidnappers' communication signals using equipment the FBI brought in. These aren't random criminals looking for ransom. This is professional, extremely well-funded, and someone has been planning this operation for months, possibly years. Who? James asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer would destroy everything he thought he knew about his life. We believe it's connected to your business, but not in the way you'd expect. Someone who specifically wants to hurt you, not just steal money. The children were never meant to be released. They were meant to disappear permanently, and the car accident was planned to eliminate the whole problem. James's hands clenched into fists as he processed this information. His business empire had made him enemies, competitors he had outmaneuvered, deals he had won through sometimes ruthless tactics. But he had never imagined anyone would target his innocent children, his own flesh and blood. What about the girl? Can we find her before they do? She knows these streets better than anyone on my force. If she doesn't want to be found, she won't be. She survived 2 years alone, learned every hiding place, every escape route. But James, Wilson met his eyes directly. She's not the enemy here. That little girl has been the only thing between your children and whatever these people really want. James thought about Elizabeth, still unconscious in the intensive care unit at St. Mary's Hospital, and felt a wave of protectiveness for this unknown girl who had taken on the mother's role when her world collapsed around her. Double the reward, he said calmly, his voice filled with new determination. But not for information about the children. For safely bringing that little girl home with my children. She's part of my family now, whether she knows it or not. Wilson nodded gravely, already reaching for his radio to coordinate the expanded search. Mr. Carter, we need to move fast. These people don't leave loose ends. They'll try to eliminate both the children and their protector before dawn, and they have resources we're still trying to understand. James grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "Then we better find them first." Sarah ran until her lungs burned like fire and her legs trembled with exhaustion that threatened to throw her onto the pavement. The babies had finally stopped crying, overwhelmed by terror and confusion, until they fell into the sleep of emotional exhaustion. But their combined weight grew heavier with each block she covered. She dove into an abandoned subway tunnel she had used for shelter during particularly harsh winter nights when the temperature dropped below freezing. The tunnel was part of the old transit system, abandoned when the city rerouted subway lines decades ago, leaving behind a network of forgotten passages that the homeless sometimes used. The tunnel was cold and damp, water dripping from rusty pipes overhead, but it was hidden and defensible. She had discovered it months ago when fleeing older street children who wanted to steal her flower money and had threatened to hurt her if she didn't hand over everything she earned that day. She placed the babies in her jacket at the driest spot she could find, checking each one carefully for injuries in the dim light filtering through grates above. Matthew had a small cut on his forehead from the fight in Mrs. Parker's apartment, but otherwise they seemed physically unharmed. Christopher and Daniel clung to her fingers when she offered them, their faces trusting despite everything they had endured. "I'm sorry," she whispered to them, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I tried to keep you safe, but I made everything worse. Mrs. Parker is hurt because of me. You're in danger because I couldn't figure out how to protect you properly." The sound of footsteps echoed from the tunnel entrance, multiple sets moving with coordination that spoke of military or police training. Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs as she grabbed the babies and moved deeper into the darkness toward the maintenance exit she had mapped during her initial exploration of the tunnel system. "I know you're in here, little girl," a voice called out, cold and professional, echoing off the walls. "We just want the children. Give them to us and you can go. No one needs to get hurt." Sarah knew they were lying. She had heard them planning to kill her in Mrs. Parker's apartment. These weren't people who left living witnesses, especially witnesses who could identify them to the police. She kept moving, feeling her way along the tunnel wall with one hand while holding the basket with the other, her bare feet silent on the wet concrete. "You can't run forever, and you're only making this harder for everyone involved. Those babies need proper medical care, proper feeding. You're in over your head." A flashlight beam swept the tunnel behind her, powerful and bright, creating dancing shadows that made the darkness ahead seem even more impenetrable. They were getting closer, their voices echoing strangely in the confined space. Sarah reached the maintenance ladder that led to a service exit near the river. Climbing with 3 babies would be nearly impossible, but staying meant certain death for all of them. She tied the basket to her back with her belt and started climbing one-handed, using her knowledge of the tunnel system she had learned during desperate winter nights when this place had been her only refuge from freezing temperatures. Every rung was agony, her arms aching from the weight and her shoulders screaming with effort, but love gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Matthew made a soft sound against her back, and she whispered assurances she wasn't sure she believed. Above ground, the service exit opened to a construction site near the docks, where new luxury condominiums were being built. Heavy machinery provided cover, excavators, cement mixers, crane equipment casting long shadows in the streetlight. But Sarah knew this area was too open to hide long-term. She needed a plan that would keep them safe until dawn, when surely the police would find them. That's when she saw police cars arriving at the tunnel entrance behind her. But these weren't regular patrol units. The officers moved with military precision, using tactical equipment that suggested special forces or FBI involvement. Someone else was hunting the hunters, which meant either rescue or an even more dangerous situation. Sarah made a desperate decision. Instead of running further into the maze of construction equipment, she climbed up a tower crane that overlooked the entire area, using her small size and agility to navigate the metal structure that would be impossible for adults to quickly climb. From her high perch above the construction site, she could see everything: The men chasing her moving through the machinery below, the police units moving to intercept them with coordinated precision. And in the distance, more black cars arriving from multiple directions. But she also saw something that made her heart stop completely. A man in an expensive coat was walking directly toward the construction site, flanked by police officers, but clearly in charge of the operation. Even from that distance, she could see his determination, his desperation, the way he moved, like someone whose entire world depended on what happened in the next few minutes. This had to be their father, the man whose children she had been protecting without knowing his name, whose children she had fed and sung to sleep and loved like her own brothers. Matthew began to cry softly, and Sarah realized they were all cold and hungry. Their little family was running out of time, and the final confrontation was rushing toward them like a freight train carrying everyone's fate. Below, gunfire erupted as two forces collided in the darkness, muzzle flashes lighting up the construction site like deadly fireworks, and Sarah held her babies closer, praying that dawn would bring safety instead of tragedy for all of them. The gunfight below lasted only minutes, but for Sarah, huddled on the crane with 3 babies, it felt like hours of terror. Muzzle flashes lit up the construction site like deadly fireworks, and the sound of automatic weapons echoed off the concrete and steel structures. When the gunfire finally stopped, she could see motionless figures on the ground and others with hands raised in surrender. The police had won this round, but her relief was short-lived as she realized the true complexity of her situation was just beginning to unfold. "Sarah Mitchell," a voice called from below, amplified by a police megaphone that made her name echo across the construction site. "This is Detective Wilson with the Federal Police. We know you're up there, and we know you've been protecting those children. You're not in trouble. We're here to help you and bring you safely home." Sarah peered over the edge of the crane, studying the scene below with the careful attention to detail that had kept her alive on the streets. The man in the expensive coat was looking directly up at her, his face illuminated by the construction site's powerful floodlights. Even from that distance, she could see he had the same remarkable blue eyes as the babies she had been caring for. "My name is James Carter," the man called out, his voice carrying clearly in the night air filled with emotion that seemed genuine. "Those are my sons you've been taking care of. I want to thank you for keeping them safe when I couldn't. You've been braver than anyone should have to be." Sarah's grip tightened on the babies, her heart racing with conflicting emotions. This was the moment she had been dreading, returning them to their real family, losing the only love she had ever known. But something felt wrong about the whole situation. If James Carter was their father, and this was the police, why had armed men been hunting them? Why had someone tried to kill Mrs. Parker? That's when Detective Wilson said something that changed everything she thought she understood. "Sarah, the men who've been chasing you tonight don't work for Mr. Carter. They work for someone who's been trying to hurt his family. Someone who orchestrated the car accident that was supposed to kill these children and their mother." A new voice cut through the night air, soft, familiar in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl and icy in its casual authority. How disappointing. "I was hoping this would resolve more discreetly, without involving so many witnesses and complications." Sarah looked down to see an older, well-dressed man stepping out of a black limousine she hadn't noticed arriving during the gunfight. Even in the dim light, she could see the resemblance to James Carter. They had the same jawline, the same confident posture. But while James radiated desperation and love, this man emanated cold calculation and barely contained fury. Several newcomers emerged from other vehicles, moving with the same professional precision as the earlier kidnappers. These weren't police or FBI agents. These were private security guards, expensive and deadly. "Hello, son," the older man said casually, as if greeting James at a family dinner instead of a crime scene. "I see you found my grandchildren. What an inconvenience." James turned, his face showing shock, betrayal, and growing horror as he processed what was happening. "Dad, what are you doing here? How did you know about this location? Cleaning up a mess that got completely out of control, James's father replied with cold efficiency. They were never supposed to find them, James. They were supposed to die in that accident with their mother. Clean, simple, no complications. James's voice barely passed a whisper, but Sarah could hear the devastation in it, even from her high perch. You tried to kill my children. I tried to save our family's legacy. James's father exploded, his composure cracking for the first time. Your marriage to that woman was bad enough. A nobody from a middle-class family with no connections, no value to our empire. But children, heirs who could challenge everything I've built, who could split the inheritance and weaken our control. I couldn't allow it. Sarah watched with horror as she realized the truth. This wasn't about random kidnappers or business enemies looking for ransom. This was about a grandfather who tried to murder his own grandchildren to protect his wealth and power, who saw the babies as obstacles instead of precious lives. If this twist left you speechless, comment shocked below and share this incredible story with friends. The girl served her purpose, James's father continued coldly, looking up at the crane where Sarah was hidden. She kept them alive until we could arrange a more permanent solution. But now that you've involved the police and created this circus, we need to eliminate all witnesses and start over. You're insane, James said, backing away from his father with obvious revulsion. These are innocent babies. They're your own blood, your grandchildren. They're obstacles to our family's continued dominance, nothing more. Sentiment is a luxury we can't afford when billions of dollars are at stake. James's father raised his hand, and his men began moving toward the crane with military coordination. But James was already running, shouting to Sarah with desperate urgency. "Jump! I'll catch you! Trust me, I won't let anything happen to you or my children." Sarah looked at the babies in her arms, Matthew moving restlessly, Daniel sleeping peacefully, Christopher holding her finger with surprising strength. Then she looked at James, whose face showed the same desperate love she felt, and made her choice. She jumped into the darkness, trusting a stranger because love recognizes love, carrying 3 babies toward salvation or disaster. James caught Sarah and the babies in a collision that knocked the breath out of both of them, but his strong arms absorbed the impact and kept them safe. The construction site exploded into chaos around them as police sirens wailed from all directions and backup units surrounded the area with coordinated precision. "Are you hurt?" James asked frantically, his hands shaking as he examined his children with desperate tenderness. "Are you injured? Did anyone hurt you?" Sarah looked at him in amazement, barely able to believe what she was seeing. This powerful, wealthy man, whose face she had seen on billboards and newspaper photos, was crying as he looked at his children. His relief and love were so overwhelming, she could feel it radiating from him like physical warmth. "They're okay," she whispered, her voice hoarse from fear and exhaustion. "I kept them safe. I promised them I would, and I did." "You did more than that," James said, his voice thick with emotion, as he looked between his children and the brave little girl who had protected them. "You saved their lives. You risked everything for children you didn't even know, and loved them when I couldn't be there to do it." Detective Wilson approached cautiously, his weapon still in his hand, as he scanned for remaining threats among the construction equipment. James's father's men had dissolved into the night with professional efficiency, but everyone knew they would regroup and return. "Mr. Carter, we need to get you out of here immediately," Wilson said gravely. "Your father's men are regrouping, and we don't know how many resources he has at his disposal. This was just the first confrontation." "Where can we go?" James asked desperately. "If my own father is behind this, if he has unlimited money and connections, nowhere is safe. He'll keep coming until he gets what he wants." "Actually," Wilson said, his voice taking a different tone, "there's something else you need to know. Your wife Elizabeth woke up an hour ago. She's been asking for her children, and she told us something crucial about the night of the accident." James's face went completely white, hope and fear fighting in his expression. "Elizabeth is awake. She's really awake. She's been conscious for several days, but she's been pretending to be in a coma because she heard your father's men at the hospital discussing plans to finish what they started if she survived to testify. Sarah listened to this conversation with growing confusion and fear. The baby's mother was alive but hiding. Their grandfather wanted them dead. The world of wealthy families was much more dangerous than life on the streets, where at least you knew who your enemies were. "Sarah," James said suddenly, kneeling to her level so they were eye to eye, "I need to ask you something very important. Those men who've been chasing you, did they say anything about why they wanted the babies? Anything that could help us understand how to stop my father?" Sarah thought back to the conversations she had heard in Mrs. Parker's apartment and during the tunnel chase. They said something about papers and money. They were worried about witnesses, but also about something called inheritance, and that time was running out. James and Wilson exchanged meaningful looks that suggested this information was more important than Sarah had realized. "The trust," James breathed, the pieces falling into place. "If the children die before their first birthday, the entire inheritance reverts to my father's control. We're talking billions of dollars, enough to buy armies of mercenaries. And in 2 months, they turn 1 year old," Wilson said gravely. "After that, your father loses his financial motive for murder." 2 months, James repeated, the weight of time pressing on all of them. "We have to keep them safe for 2 months while fighting someone with unlimited resources." A new sound filled the air, helicopters approaching from multiple directions, their searchlights beginning to sweep the construction site. Wilson grabbed his radio, his face tense as he listened to the urgent chatter. "Mr. Carter, we have a major problem. Those aren't our helicopters. Your father has called in private military contractors." James looked at Sarah, who still held Christopher, while Matthew and Daniel slept peacefully in their basket, oblivious to the danger around them. This brave little girl had already done so much, risked everything, but the fight was far from over. "Sarah," he said urgently, "I know this is scary, and I know you have no reason to trust adults after everything you've been through, but I need your help. You know how to hide, how to survive, how to protect them in ways I never could. You already saved them once. You want me to stay?" Sarah asked, barely daring to believe what she was hearing. "I want you to be part of our family," James said simply, his voice filled with absolute sincerity. "These children need their big sister, and I need someone who loves them as much as I do, someone who already proved they'd die before letting anyone hurt them." The helicopters were getting closer, their searchlights beginning to sweep the construction site with military precision. Time was running out, and decisions made in the next few minutes would determine whether they all lived or died. "Will you help me save our children?" James asked, extending his hand to her. Sarah looked at Matthew, Daniel, and Christopher, her little boys who had taught her what love really means, who made her understand that family wasn't about blood, but about choice and sacrifice and protection. Then she looked at James, whose eyes had the same fierce love she felt. "Always," she promised, taking his hand. "We're family now. And if you believe love can overcome any obstacle, leave your like now and subscribe to the channel for more stories that will touch your heart." And then, as Wilson led them toward a waiting police van, dodging searchlights and racing against time, Sarah realized tomorrow would bring the greatest challenge yet, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't facing it alone. The hospital felt like a fortress under siege. FBI agents at every entrance, police officers patrolling hallways, and James Carter walking the secure wing where his family was finally reunited. But even surrounded by protection, he knew his father's reach was long and his resources seemingly unlimited. Sarah sat beside Elizabeth's hospital bed, gently holding Christopher, while Elizabeth cradled Matthew and Daniel for the first time since the accident. The scene was both beautiful and heartbreaking. A mother reunited with her children and a homeless little girl who had become their protector. "You saved them," Elizabeth whispered to Sarah, tears streaming down her face. "When I couldn't protect them, you loved them as if they were yours." "They are mine," Sarah said simply. "Family isn't just blood, it's who you choose to protect." Elizabeth reached out and took Sarah's small hand. "Then you're my daughter now. These children need their big sister." James felt his heart swell with gratitude for this incredible girl who taught them what real family means. But their moment was interrupted by Detective Wilson bursting through the door. "We have a problem," Wilson announced gravely. "Your father has filed emergency custody papers claiming you're mentally unstable. He has judges on his payroll and enough legal power to tie this up for months." Elizabeth struggled to sit more upright. "There's something I haven't told you. Something about the night of the accident." Everyone turned to her, sensing this was crucial. "Your father was there, James. I saw him directing his men after we went into the river, but I was wearing my emergency recording device. Everything streamed to our home security system." James stared at his wife in shock. The recording survived. Everything is there. His voice, his instructions, his admission that he orchestrated the murders. Wilson was reaching for his phone when the hospital room door exploded inward. James's father entered, flanked by 6 men in expensive suits, moving with the confidence of someone who owned half the city. Behind them came hospital security clearly on his payroll. "Hello, son," James's father said calmly. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "These children don't belong to anyone," James said, standing protectively in front of the bed. "They're obstacles to everything our family has built." His cold eyes fell on Sarah, including witnesses who've seen too much. "You won't take them," Sarah said, standing with Christopher in her arms. Despite being 7 years old, she stood face to face with the most powerful man in the city without blinking. "I won't let you hurt them." James's father smiled coldly, touching but ultimately useless. That's when Elizabeth pressed a button on her phone. The recording played for everyone to hear. Crystal clear audio of James's father giving orders to kill his own grandchildren. His admission of orchestrating the car accident, his discussion of eliminating witnesses. As his voice filled the room, his face went white with rage. "You recorded me," he said, his mask of composure finally falling. "The FBI is downloading copies as we speak," Elizabeth replied. Wilson smiled grimly as federal agents burst through every entrance. The Carter Corporation board received copies 10 minutes ago, as did the district attorney and all the major news networks. James watched as his father was surrounded, his empire crumbling in real time as news alerts flooded phones throughout the room. Carter Corporation's stock was plummeting. Federal investigators were freezing assets. "This isn't over," James's father snarled as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "You had resources," Wilson corrected. "Now you have a prison cell." As James's father was led away, James felt months of fear lifting from his shoulders. More than relief, he felt overwhelming gratitude for his wife, who had risked everything, the detective who fought for justice, and the incredible little girl who had saved his family. 6 months later, James sat in his garden, watching Sarah teach his children to walk on the soft grass. At 18 months old, Matthew, Daniel, and Christopher were healthy, happy, and devoted to their big sister. Elizabeth joined him on the bench, her recovery complete and her joy untouched by fear. "Do you think she knows how much she means to us?" Elizabeth asked, watching Sarah laugh as Christopher took his first steps. "She's learning," James replied. "She never had a real family before." "Dad, Mom," Sarah called, using names that made James's heart jump. Christopher walked 6 whole steps. James and Elizabeth ran to celebrate with their children, all 4 of them. And James realized that sometimes the most powerful force wasn't money or influence. Sometimes it was just love, brave enough to protect what mattered most. "We're home," he whispered to his family. And for the first time, James Carter understood what those words really meant. If this story touched your heart as much as it touched ours, leave in the comments which moment moved you the most. And don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any incredible story like this. Share with someone who needs to believe that true love always wins. Until the next story.